we're moving right along here. I'm Hawkeye, and this is the fifth episode looking into why the Leafs haven't won a cup since 1967. And we're moving into the next season. It'll be the 1964 NHL Amateur Draft, the second annual. So it was April the 25th, 1964. That was the date when the Leafs raised the Stanley Cup right at Maple Leaf Gardens and were champions for the third consecutive year. Excellent job there. Crazy as hockey is played way longer than that now. That's April. The season's wrapping up. I always thought, even when I was a kid, it was like May 2-4. Okay, let's get this season done because I was always okay. I'm ready to watch some baseball now. That was always uh, you're getting into summer feelings there, or whatever. It's really good weather, but that's not the case. I think they almost played into July this season, which is crazy to me. But anyways, that's how it goes. So it was on June the 11th, 1964, when the second annual NHL Amateur Draft was held just like the previous season. It was at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, Quebec, once again. Now, for this draft, the order was already fixed. It wasn't actually based upon the standings in the previous season, which is interesting for me. I'm not exactly sure why they were fixed, or if it was just on the uh, initial contract when it was signed that we're going to do a draft. I'm not sure. If you know it there, slap it in the comments section. I'd appreciate that. Um, but in this draft, the Leafs would pick sixth. Under the idea of the standings, they would have picked fourth. Or in today's standing, which I'm totally fine with, they won the Stanley Cup, they would have been sixth. There's only six teams, so it's not a big difference, but they will be picking fifth in this draft. Now, in the previous draft, they were 16 years old. Now they're 17 years old. So it's actually the same um, age. They're just a year older. Um, and you are certainly eligible for the draft if you already weren't sponsored or previously drafted as well. So this draft, it didn't say, once again, there's only four rounds for the six teams. This time, everybody did make a selection. Nobody just said, we'll pass this by. We don't want to draft it. So everybody made their picks. But in this draft, only nine of the players that were drafted actually played in the NHL. So it wasn't a huge influx of players, but there is one here available in this draft that um, definitely would change your organization in the future. Absolutely. Hall of Famer. Um, so, anyways, so after an excellent 1963 draft for the Leafs, I wouldn't have changed anything that they did. Let's see how this draft goes the second time around with Punch Imlach, the general manager. So the first overall selection went to the Detroit Red Wings. With this pick, they ended up selecting right winger Claude Gauthier. Um, it was really set up this way. It's not like due to the sponsorship, and this age group has already gone through a draft. Um, it's kind of set up. You're going to get some busts in this draft, and unfortunately, Claude definitely was. He did not end up playing a game in the NHL. Um, so there you have it. Uh, Now, with the number five pick, the Leafs ended up selecting right winger Tom Martin. He was born right in Toronto, and after he was drafted, he played 3 seasons for the Toronto Marlboros in the OHA. I'm sorry. A lot of Leafs through the years ended up playing for the Marlies or the Marlboros in minor hockey before they came up to Toronto or wherever their next stop would be. Um, while playing with the Marlies, Tom ended up playing 146 games, scoring 74 goals adding 97 assists for 171 points. Showing some great offensive power, especially in the last season there. His numbers really were very good. Um, he ended up just playing 3 games in the NHL for the Leafs. He did score a goal, but then Tom did jump over to the WHA when it started up. And he played there for a few seasons, playing with the Ottawa Nationals and the Toronto Toros. There he played for former Leaf Billy Harris, who is on the team right now with the Leafs. Um, while he played there, he was in 212 games, scored 59 goals with 76 assists for 135 points. In the 1973-74 season for the Toros, he actually ended up getting 25 goals that year. So a good job. And then Tom also ended up coaching the Marlboros in the OHL for a couple of seasons, from 1983 to 85 as well. Now, Tom only ended up playing a few games in the NHL. Who they could have drafted with their first pick, um, and I'm going to add him to the list of guys coming up with the Leafs. This is who they should have picked, was Tim Ecclestone. He actually later did play with the Leafs in the 70s, but he was also born in Toronto. He went on to play 692 games in the NHL, scoring 126 goals with 233 assists for 359 points. He was drafted by the New York Rangers in the second round, um, but he was then paraded after the expansion draft to the St. Louis Blues. And then that's when his career started in 1967-68 for that club. As said, he did play with the Leafs. It was at the end of the 1973-74 season and beginning of the 1974-75 season. He also played for the Detroit Red Wings and the Atlanta Flames. He did play in the 1971 All-Star game as well. Interesting to note, I've talked about him already, but he was actually traded for Rod Sealing twice in his career. And I think Sealing went the other way to the Rangers uh, from the Blues, I believe, in the first trade. And then Ecclestone got playing time in St. Louis. Now, after his playing days, he was an assistant coach with the Atlanta Flames for a few seasons from 1977 through 1980 before they moved to Calgary, where they are at this day. So they could have picked up Tim Ecclestone, who, he was a good player. Now, in the second round with the number 11 pick, the Leafs selected forward David Cody. He as well was born in Toronto. He never did make the NHL. He never made that jump. But he would be well known, perhaps in horse racing circles. That's where he made his name, was in horse racing. He was the original owner and trainer of the winner of the 2009 Kentucky Derby. The horse's name was Mine That Bird. It went on to win $2.2 million over the course of its career. Pretty darn good. So for Dave, that's okay. He found his way after the 1964 draft, even though he never played a second for the Leafs. Now, with this pick, this is the player that could change the future of the Leafs right here. Um, who they passed on, and hey, you can't blame Toronto. Everybody passed on this guy. He didn't go until the third round, and it was the Boston Bruins who ended up drafting him. He was then later traded for really nothing. It was like, I forget who the other players were. And there was 3 other players. I don't think any of them played a game in the NHL, but he was traded to the Montreal Canadiens. Um, And whew, in the 70s, he alone couldn't win you a Stanley Cup, but my oh my. They could have drafted goaltender Tim Dryden. At his time of playing, he was an extremely tall goalie. He was 6'4", which is very tall at that time. He was born in Hamilton, Ontario, and he did only play 8 seasons in the NHL. But what things he did in such a very short time. Um, he went to the All Star game 5 times. That's 1972 and 75 through 78. He led the league in wins as a goalie 4 times, 1971 through 73 and 1975-76, when he got his career high in wins. He had 42 wins that year. And that was when he got the ties. That's quite an accomplishment. And he also led the league in 1976-77. He led the league 3 times in save percentage, 1972-73 and 1976 through 78. He led the league 4 times in goals against average, 1972-73. He had his career high in 1975-76 when he had a goals against of just 2.03. And then he led the league from 1977 through 79. He led the league 4 times in shutouts as well, 1972, 73, 1975 through 77, and 1976-77 when he had his career high. He had 10 that season, and 1978-79. In addition, he won the Vezina 5 times. Yes, 5 times he won the Vezina in only 8 years. 1972-73 and 1975 through 1979. He also won the Calder Trophy as the Rookie of the Year, 1971-72. He ended up winning the Stanley Cup an incredible 6 times in only 8 years. And he was the Conn Smythe winner as the playoff MVP in 1970-71. Wait a minute. That's right. He won the Conn Smythe as a playoff MVP before he won Rookie of the Year. That just doesn't seem fair, does it? But that's the way it is. His first season, I think he only played 6 games in the regular season, and then he was the guy in the playoffs for the Habs. Incredible. He definitely played on some of the greatest teams ever assembled in the NHL back in the 70s when Scotty Bowman was the coach. I've seen them play. I will definitely talk about them when I get to that time period, but man, they were a team. They could play any way you want to play. They could do it. Much like the New York Islanders after them, or maybe even the Edmonton Oilers. But wow, they've had some dynamite teams in Montreal there, and he was the guy in the net. Now, if he was drafted by the Leafs, just imagine you currently have Johnny Bower in your net. He retires, in steps Kenny Dryden, and you got your next guy to play A1 goaltending for you in Toronto. My, that would have been something if they ended up drafting Kenny Dryden. But in the third round, then we go. The Leafs ended up drafting defenseman Mike Pelech. He was also known as Mike Makita. Now, with Kenny Dryden, he also had, I liked his nickname. He had the Thieving Giraffe. What a nickname that is. Hilarious. Um, Now, Pelech, he was born in Toronto, and after he was drafted, he played 2 seasons in the or the OHA, I'm sorry, for the Toronto Marlboros. There he played 65 games. He scored a couple of goals with 21 assists for 23 points. And he had a little edge to his game as he grabbed 166 penalty minutes too in those 65 games. His first season was 1967-68 for the Leafs when he played in 24 games. The following season, he was getting full time work. He was getting more playing time, and he had 65 games that following year. He ended up scoring his career high of goals of 12 in 1973-74, but then he did jump over to the WHA. Lots of players ended up doing that, and a lot of Leafs did that. Um, he was there for 2 seasons and played for the Vancouver Blazers and the Cincinnati Stingers. And then he came back and played for the Leafs for a couple more seasons. He came back to Toronto. So in the end, he ended up playing 441 games in the NHL, all for the Leafs. That's the only team he played for in the NHL. He scored 26 goals, added 88 assists for 114 points, and he grabbed up 566 PIMs as well. So he was good. And that was a good pick in the third round. But they could have picked somebody else. Um, I always found this one really interesting that they didn't draft this guy. They knew darn well who his dad was. He's a Leaf legend. You'd think maybe you'd give the son a chance. And that is still Apps Jr. For some reason, the Leafs or Punch Himlack didn't like what they saw in him, so they passed him by. Didn't end up drafting him. They went with Mike Pellick, but Silap Jr. played center. His career started in 1970-71. He went on to play 727 games, scoring 183 goals, adding 423 assists for 606 points. His best season was 1975-76 for the Pittsburgh Penguins, when he scored 32 goals and he had 99 points that season. He also played for the New York Rangers, who was the team that drafted him originally, and he also played for the LA Kings. But I would say he'd be known for playing for the Pens in the 70s. He also played in the 1975 All-Star game as well. So they could have drafted Sil Apps Jr. and he could have been playing center for them in the 70s. Um, Now, in the final round, as I said, there's only 4 rounds in the 64 draft. With the 23rd pick, the Leafs chose another defenseman, and this time it was Jim Dory. He was born in Kingston, Ontario, and after he was drafted, he played 3 seasons in the WH and the OHA. I keep saying WHA, the OHA, and he played for the Niagara Falls Flyers and the London Nationals. He started his NHL career in 1968-69 for the Leafs. In his rookie season, he had 200 penalty minutes. So he was a rough and tumble defenseman, which I like. He must have not been afraid to drop the mitts. But that was his career high, right in his rookie season. He went on to play 232 games in the NHL, scored 25 goals with 74 assists for 99 points, and he had 553 penalty minutes as well. But once the WHA started up, Jim jumped over to that league and he stayed in that league until it folded. So from 1972 through 79, Dory was playing in the WHA. He played in that league for 431 games, scoring 52 goals, adding 232 assists for 284 points. And of course, he had some penalty minutes. He had 617 of them as well. He played for the New England Whalers, the Toronto Toros, alongside a former Leaf, Frank Mahovlich, and a future Leaf, at this point, Pat Hickey as well, um, and the Quebec Nordique as well. In the WHA, he won the Avco Cup, so that was their Stanley Cup, with the Whalers in 1973 and the Nords in 1977. Now, there was only one player picked after Dory. He didn't play a game in the NHL, so this was the correct pick in the fourth round for the Leafs, and that's Jim Dory. And I believe after his playing days, he I think was an assistant coach with the Kingston Frontenacs in the OHL, and then became their head coach for a couple of seasons in the mid '80s there. After his playing days, if I'm not mistaken. So after a great 1963 draft, which I wouldn't have changed anything that they did, the 64 draft was okay. They picked a couple of guys, Pellick, Dory. Um, they went on and played some good hockey for Toronto. Um, but yeah, there's a couple guys they missed on. And I like, hey, as I said earlier in another video, hindsight is 2020. You can't go into a draft and pick the best player, that's available every time you draft. But those were they missed on some players in this draft. So I'll add their names to the list, the guys that they should have drafted. So in their draft pool right now are guys young, going to be coming up later. We got Walt McKechnie, Jim McKinney, Jerry Meehan. They did draft all them in the '63 draft. And then I'm going to add Tim Ecclestone, Kenny Dryden, Sil Apps Jr., and Jim Dory. That's a very, very good list of players right there that are playing in minor hockey right now and coming up through your ranks. So that's good. So there you have it. So yeah, certainly if you like this video, hit the little thumb on the bottom there and hit like. Don't be afraid to subscribe as well. I'm definitely going to keep adding videos on here, and absolutely you can comment on whatever you like if you want to. So that's it. And I believe my next video may be about the following season, the 1964-65 season, and see how that went for the Stanley Cup winning Toronto Maple Leafs that season. But anyways, until next time, go Leafs go.